All right, and welcome to another edition of the Daily Space Weather. Looking at Sunspot 2748, which formed yesterday not too surprisingly. And we've been in geomagnetic storm or unrest conditions for a solid 48 hours. Happy Labor Day, folks. And it is the 160th anniversary of the Carrington event, an event creating auroras which were seen as far south as places like Guatemala, Jamaica, and Cuba. We're looking at the colored magnetogram here. And we see a bunch of activity kicking off. There's some activity in here, some organized fields over here, and an organized field forming here as well as here. So keeping an eye on this sunspot, it is beta class, and there is some increased probability for flaring. Although not very big flares, it's a pretty small sunspot. So something to keep an eye on throughout the day here is Sunspot 2748. And let's look at some more data. And here are the aurora forecasts, and you see significant aurora forecasts there. If you are far enough north, go out and have yourself a look. Or far enough south, obviously, if you're on Antarctica or something like that. Anyway, there are the aurora forecasts. We'll let that play through. Dying down a little bit as the solar wind density is very low, but the solar wind speed very high. Let's talk about supporting the channel. Please consider doing so via Patreon, as YouTube pays us precisely nothing to make these videos. So please consider becoming a patron. There's a little bit of changing around with the tiers. If you don't like Patreon, hey, anonymously donate via PayPal. Or if you're in the market for CBDs, check out the Hemp Lucid Spaced Out campaign, also linked below the video, specifically formulated for our spaced out viewers. So again, if you're in the market for CBDs, check that out. Help support the channel and your own health that way. Let's look at some more data. And we see the real-time solar wind. Phi angle looks like it's zoning back in on 180 degrees. As there are some diffuse coronal holes, we'll look at it at the end of the video on 193 angstroms. Solar wind density down to 2.14 protons. Solar wind speed remains highly elevated. That coronal hole wind stream, 728 kilometers per second. And there's the data according to the ACE spacecraft. Some great images posted on spaceweather.com of the Aurora Australis. This one taken near Christchurch, New Zealand. Some great pink, purple, even some yellow auroras there. So quite interesting there. Check out spaceweather.com for that. Shout out to solarham.net. There's a sunspot analysis. It is a beta class sunspot, and so there is a slightly improved chance of things like a C-class solar flare on this 160th anniversary of the Carrington event. Next, we'll check out the Magnetosphere movies, looking at density here, and you see a pretty low density shown in light colors. High density shown in navy blue there. And we're seeing some slight changes there in the solar wind, and a puffy looking magnetosphere as far as the density goes. Here's the pressure. And we see significant pressure on the day and nighttime sides, as well as significant electron flux. We saw very high relativistic electrons yesterday, and if you were a Patreon patron, you would have gotten alerts about that before everybody else. Next, we'll look at the global electric circuit here in terms of ground geospace magnetic perturbations. We've got a lot of stuff to cover yet, so we're going to keep it as short as possible, but we're going to let this 4 hours of data play through as we do most days, and you can see the effects of that much current going through the planet. We see even magnetic perturbations on the equator. I'll let that play through a second time as there's a lot of data on there, and I know how inconvenient it is to pause or rewind these videos. It's because the software sucks. Dear Google, Facebook, YouTube, etc., learn to code. Here you can say the KP index for the last 3 days has been unsettled to G1 level geomagnetic storm there. So we've had a couple of bouts of a KP of 6. Please leave a comment if you heard any tales of things like power outages. We should expect reports to come in the next day or two, as these things are always a bit delayed. Now the F2 layer is showing some anomalies here, especially on the sun side. We are seeing some really big disparities here in the electron flux. So significant Van Allen belt charging as well as satellite charging hazards galore. And you can see from the latest image here, we see some F2 weakness here on the daytime side, and the nighttime side looking pretty normal. And we are seeing some significant charging hazards here over Central and Northern South America, as well as most of the Tropic of Capricorn region. We have seen some slight perturbations here in the X-ray flux, so it would be no surprise to finally see a B-class flare today, depending on what that sunspot does. No forecast as to whether it's degrading or increasing yet, but there is some other activity kicking off apparently. So we try to cover it first, folks, and that's for you, the viewer. Here's a GOES electron flux. Again, we saw very high levels of electron flux here. When it gets over 10 to the 5th, that's about when charging hazards start to occur. And we're going to see a dip in the electron flux here again today. Now, if that solar wind speed drops down as anticipated, as forecasted, this won't be as big of a dip as it was 2 days ago or yesterday. So we're expecting this to reach more nominal type levels. Because again, we are expecting to see a ramp down of the solar wind speed throughout the day today. Here's the total electron content forecast. And this is going to tell you things like GPS errors. And it's actually fairly nominal right at this point. Wouldn't be any surprise to see some pretty wild swings in the electron flux throughout the day, but not a big drop off, as again, we're expecting that solar wind speed to drop down at some point throughout the day today. Please leave a comment to the Scove if you're watching this video, and then waiting 10 days to produce a space weather video. If you weren't aware where stuff's located, well, that's where stuff is. And that's where stuff will be in 1 week, approaching a full moon. And here's the GOES X-ray imager. Seeing a bunch of static on there. And you can see that sunspot represented just north of the equator, and that is a cycle 24 sunspot, folks, not a cycle 25 sunspot. But a little bit of an increase there in the X-ray flux. And 10.7 centimeter radio flux back up to 67. Still solar minimum conditions, though, as far as the 10.7. And, well, at least there's a sunspot. So solar minimum maybe not as deep as people forecast. Here's the GOES magnetometer, and we see continued sawtooth pattern in that. No surprise there. And let's look at the Gong 2. Here's the Gong 2 data. And we do see this magnetic battle going on the far side of the sun. Can't really access stereo A today. The ISWA site is down. So we're just going to ignore that. And we'll look at it next time as we do this daily. Remember, the magnetic environment can change without any warning at all. And this data is 1 hour and 27 minutes old. Here's where stuff is above my head. I've clicked on Polaris, the North Star, the North Celestial Pole, and by the way, in-the-sky.org allows you to animate the map. Where will you be when Deneb sets? It's going to be at about 9 a.m. my time. Let's say 8:50. as the cosmic pileup starts again today, as a bunch of things like the Sun and Mars and Venus are all in the sky at the same time. Moving on to the earthquake rundown. We did see a very deep quake by Fiji. We'll cover it in a minute. Going back about 20 hours here, we see a 4.8 at Papua New Guinea. We're only covering 4+ magnitude quakes here, folks. And we see a 4.9 at the Philippines. Also a 4.6 at Chile. That quake is at depth. Heads up western South America for a larger quake at the surface. As we've been warning for weeks about this, and the magnitude 7 earthquake drought continues. Here's a 6.7 at Fiji at 600 kilometers depth. This would be about a magnitude 8 quake if it happened at the surface, and would have a massive tsunami risk. Let's take a look at the location of that quake. Again, super deep, 600+ kilometers. And there's a location of that one, located right in between Fiji and Tonga. An 8 magnitude quake in that area would present tsunami dangers for all kinds of areas such as Tonga, Fiji, New Caledonia, and New Zealand. Anyway, that's a significant quake and very, very deep. 4.6 in Indonesia. Here's another 4.6 at Fiji. That one is also at 600 kilometers. Incredibly deep quake. Here's a very deep quake at Russia. This one looks like it's just north of Japan. Let's check out the location of that one since it's such a deep quake also. And there's a location of that one. And moving on, here's another Chilean quake. This one's a 5.1 magnitude, largest quake we've seen there in quite a while. 4.9 at Cinnabung. Looks like it's actually located near the volcano, folks. Anyway, there's that quake. And scrolling up the list, we see just a couple hours ago here a 5.0 at Guam. Shout out U.S. military personnel if you felt that quake. Please leave a comment if you're allowed. Here's a 4.8 at Guam also. Moving on to more stuff. Here's the pressure map, courtesy windy.com. We'll let that play through for about 24 hours. I would note that Hurricane Dorian is stalling out. So despite being very powerful, not looking like it's going to make landfall until Wednesday night or Thursday morning on South Carolina. All right, let's play that through here. Again, this is the GFS model that we're using here, folks. And I would say heads up New Zealand for a large earthquake, as there's a low pressure system moving in and acting weird. It looks like it's cannibalizing another system right in this area. So that I would say heads up in Oceania for a large quake at the surface, especially with those two 600+ kilometer deep quakes at Fiji. Pretty scary stuff. I would also note a massive anticyclone over the North Atlantic here. In the Northern Hemisphere, when you see a clockwise rotation, it's an indication of positive charge, lots of protons, high pressure. It's an anticyclone. And let's move on. Here's your daily volcano rundown. Shout out Anomalous Howard. Are you enjoying the carbonyl sulfide? Shivaluch still exploding, producing a 13,000 foot ash plume. Mount Aso, 6,000 foot ash plume there. Sanjiang Api exploding, 10,000 foot ash plume there. Dakono exploding, 6,000 foot ash plume there. Carrington back on the list, producing a 16,000 foot ash plume, excuse me, and exploding. Popocatépetl exploding, 20,000 foot ash plume there. Revenador exploding, 14,000 foot ash plume there. Sabancaya, 26,000 foot ash plume there and exploding. And Nevados de Chilean also exploding. Please do not fly your homemade Ferrari branded ultralight helicopter over Novato State Chilean. It's producing a 13,000-foot plume of ash, and that could end badly for your aviation career. Here's a zoom in of Dorian on Null School. We are looking at the surface winds, and they're looking pretty high, folks. We're not going to zoom fully in on this or anything. And our wind is being measured in kilometers per hour here. Anyway, let's zoom out. We're going to show you the jets as we do most days. And here's the Western world jet streams. Really, we've got a low pressure right next to that anticyclone there at the flight level 25,000. Extreme meridional jet stream flow here. Looks like it's going to be some cold, cold days in southern South America. Check out that nearly perfectly north flow right there, coming straight out of Antarctica. That is going to make for some chilly days in Chile. And here's the jets in the east. We've got some backward flowing jet streams there over Siberia. So some funky jet stream flow, folks. Extremely meridional there in the southern hemisphere. And let's move on. Here is the U.S. Doppler radar as we see a strong band of storms here over the mid-Atlantic. Pretty heavy storm there over, looks like north of Yuma, Arizona there. And let's look at some more data. Here's a NASA GOES shortwave radar map, shortwave satellite animation rather, via the GOES interactive weather satellites. And we see some of those outer bands are starting to hit Florida now, as this thing is just stalling here before it makes a sudden right turn to the north. We'll let that play through one more, and then we'll look at the water vapor. And here's Hurricane Dorian in the water vapor map. There is a massive high pressure ridge up here, and this is what's affecting the overall flow of this thing. There's also dry air all around. This is African dust over here, this area. This is not going to help to strengthen the storm. I realize wind speeds are very high, but this thing isn't really, it's going to continue to pummel Bahamas for an extended period as it stalls and tries to make this right turn to the north. Now we're on Tropical Tidbits here, looking at the GFS model, and we're looking at 18 Zulu, 18 Universal Time, 1800 hours on Wednesday, which is when South Carolina is expected to start to get some extreme rain. And then through Saturday, September 7th, we're going to see this extreme rain here over the coast of South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia. And they're looking for around 16 to 20 inches of rain there, according to the GFS forecast. Again, I'll animate this for you. This is the way this is expected to play out. Here's the current time. There's Wednesday. And there's Thursday, expecting heavy rain to start hitting South Carolina on Thursday. Not a lot of rain expected in Florida, though. Not a lot of rain expected. Don't freak out, folks. Although if you're in coastal South Carolina or North Carolina, it may be a good time to book a hotel someplace else. Stay tuned for a bonus feature, and don't forget to view our next video, as we are coming out with another one momentarily. It's the "That is censored and that is a hole in the ground." Censored versus sinkhole. And it's about that time. Here's the bonus feature. We are looking for a magnetic connection with this coronal hole here, although it may be held in check by that sunspot. So if you look south of the equator, down in this region where my pointer is, there is a coronal hole right there, just south of that sunspot, 2748. So that's an earthquake risk there, folks, and we're seeing some significant anomalies there in the ionosphere, as well as some deep quakes around the world. So be prepared for disasters, folks. Be prepared on this anniversary of the Carrington event. And we're going to talk about it more in depth in our That Is Censored and That Is a Hole in the Ground video coming out momentarily. So in any case, enjoy your Labor Day. Leave a comment. Let us know what kind of, are you having a feast? We're still doing burgers and hot dogs. Even more burgers and hot dogs of the cheeseburger variety. So anyway, when you're staring at that thing, don't drink. And if you drink, stare at that thing anyway. Use the proper instruments like the SDO and don't drive. Seriously, don't drive. Labor Day is a terrible day to drive. So don't do it. And since it'll never be now again, may the solar wind be at your back and the atherosclerosis absent from your veins.